In these examples, we'll be looking at the tools, but we won't be making actual comparisons to the reference. We'll look at the visual, and what you're going to notice with some of these processors as we move forward is that it's very difficult to achieve that same kind of level with the freeware. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. At the end of the day, you want to do what feels and what sounds right. And as long as you're roughly in the ballpark, which normally coincides with what sounds about right for that processor, you're really good to go. So you don't have to freak out or worry too much about necessarily trying to match reference levels on commercial tracks, especially one that's as loud as this. I understand that I would probably need to have this track sent away to a professional in order to get that kind of result, and I'm okay with not making it. So in this first video, we're going to review the LoudMax, old faithful, kind of like an L1, L2 sort of style here. And I personally really love this one. It works out great, never have any problems. And it even includes the link control, which we'll be looking at first, because this is all about listening to how the balances are changing, not just necessarily loudness, and the link allows us to do that. So this is what we're going to be working with, and this is what we're going to be maximizing. I just picked a loud section in the song. We could either do this section here or this section over here. This one's a little bit cleaner, so I think you'll be able to hear the results a bit better. And we're peaking out around 4, and I think in general there's about 3 dB of headroom at the loudest part in this track. So I could put some kind of tool device and drive a little bit of gain in, but I always feel like in the digital domain, you don't need to worry about that as much, especially because if you need to, you could actually stack limiters or combine limiters on top of each other if they have different characteristics and different feels. And I think that's something we will explore a little bit later on. So as I turn the link on, I can start to bring this down. I can start to get some of that limiting, and I can actually listen to the result of this and whether or not I like the way it sounds. And also keep in mind and kind of watch what's happening with the RMS on the reference as compared to what we have here on our track that we're working with. So even with this degree of limiting, and you can notice from listening to it that still sounds very clean and transparent, that's because you can really slam this one and it normally still sounds pretty good. Even so, we're seeing more movement with our RMS than we're seeing here with our reference, which tells you just kind of how loud this really is. So now when we take the link control off, we can start to bring some of that gain back in. Bypass this, hear it on and off, and just see how much it's changing our balances. I'm not going to do too much describing to you what I hear. I want you to really listen. I think once I tell you what to listen for or what I'm hearing, it kind of throws off the point. So really use your ears. This is also something to experiment with on your own without having to worry about any audio file compression based on uploading these videos. So the only real big issue that I'm hearing right now is on that last hit, how much more aggressive this is clamping down. And the reason it's so much more aggressive is because intentionally in the track, I tried to vary up the dynamic of those crash hits a pretty decent amount. And now it's causing some problems if I'm trying to go for a really aggressive degree of loudness because it becomes very audible on that final hit. So in reality, if I was to use the LoudMax and only be using one instance of this and assuming we're not applying any sort of compression beforehand, which could help with that situation that I was just describing, I probably wouldn't even be this aggressive with it. It sounds pretty good around here, but I'd probably even take it back a little more. Yeah, you can hear that on that last hit, it works a lot better, even with just taking a little bit more out. And that has to do with the character of this particular limiter. When it has to get more aggressive, it becomes quite a bit more audible. And that's the expectation. That actually is what I'm assuming to have happen here. So I'm pretty happy with what it sounds like in and around this range. But if we want, we can slam it pretty hard and we can kind of get away with it, but you can still tell then that it's maybe being over-processed and that you should probably go back to the actual track and apply maybe some more compression or different forms of peak limiting or not have such a wide range and dynamic on the hits to begin with, and that would help you out. So let's go really aggressive with it and just hear where we start to kind of max out the loudness and to a point where it doesn't even really start to add anything. That's something to be aware of when you are listening to these. So you notice there that as we start to pull back, you can hear the musicality kind of brought back in. And so it's all about trying to strike that balance of how loud do I need to go versus when is it too loud and I start to kind of lose specific elements in the track. And so for me, I keep settling in around this area. That 8.3 seems to be where I keep wanting to go. And that's probably what I would use if I was to use this particular peak limiter sonic maximizer. Sometimes you'll see people actually combine these. So for example, I might actually set the output on this one to like -1, go into my second one, set this to be minus, 0.1, 0.2. A lot of times -0.3 was used as kind of a mastering for iTunes reference. Nowadays, you don't have to kind of worry about that quite as much. I'm trying to get 0.2. It's very difficult, but still, this is something that you can experiment with. So we're going to use 2 of them and see if that helps us get any more gain out of this. And again, we're just listening for the musicality of it. Okay, so if you see what's happening with this gain reduction, you should actually start to see and notice how this works quite well, especially with that last cymbal hit. So you remember the last crash hit was really the aggressive part, and we'll see that it clamps down a bit harder in this instance, but in this instance it won't. It will stay pretty consistent. So let's listen to this one more time with that in mind. So you can see that this is one strategy to potentially extract a little bit more gain. And so this one is working when it does come in. It's pretty consistent, and that's just based on how we have this set up. This one is very dynamic. It's bouncing a lot, and that's a good thing. But if you need to really even things out and not make that pumping quite as audible, you can then go and use the second one. Or what you more likely might do is use a different loudness guy in here, a different sonic maximizer, and then combine it with the LoudMax at the tail end. All right, so this is our first example. We'll be looking at 2 more plugins that we haven't looked at so far in this course, so stay tuned for that.